Cool. I think I try and keep it quite practical. So you're going to hear a lot about kind of what we do and how we do it. And as Rishi said in the introduction, specifically about 6 years of specific work on the street connecting project, but also linking into 15 years of community building and activity here in Bromford in Birmingham. So it's a long story. I think the other couple of kind of side notes that I always say to people is when I'm going to talk about something quite practical, but please don't see this as a model to copy. Sometimes I get lots of questions of saying, you know, how can we do street connecting in our community? How can we do what you do? And I kind of get the impression you've not heard and listened. This is something, street connecting, which is what I'm going to talk to you about, works here in Bromford in the 1960s council estate, as we call them here. It works for us. It works in our environment. And we've taken lots of the principles of asset-based community development and seen what's working here. And the other bit that sometimes happens, and I don't mind the odd question about policies and health and safety, but it's probably not, you know, don't get too hung up on health and safety and some of the stuff like that. So kind of embrace what we try and do, and then take the conversations back to your communities and see what happens. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see. I'm going to whistle through a bit of a presentation and then offer some space towards the end of the presentation for some questions about the let's see if it's going to work. Yeah, here we go. Offer some space for questions at a certain point, and then I think we're going to break off into groups and have some space for you guys to have conversations and come back. So hopefully lots of space for you guys to have conversations yourselves rather than just listening to me. So street connecting started, as I said, intentionally in 2016 as a bit of a pilot project. And then after 6 months, we saw that it was working, and there was some investment from the National Lottery here to take this forward. And now we're in the phase of another 3-4 years of funding, which is really exciting to kind of see something through over about a 10-year period. So quite exciting to kind of see that through over a period of time. So street connecting, the key thing, it's in the name, it's there. It's about connectors. It's about finding, unearthing connectors in your communities. The way that I think hopefully you've come across this term connectors. It's quite a big thing within the asset-based world. How we see connectors they are people who have a passion for the well-being of the community. They're people who are well connected and they are trusted. They're people who are good at making connections. They are people who have a motivation to connect more, build community. They're great at listening more than talking. They make people feel welcome. They're very, very good at spotting the gifts and skills in others. And they are people that are believers in all people. And I'm a very passionate believer that every neighbourhood in the world has got connectors. They exist. They are there. One of the questions that I always get asked, and that I imagine it will get asked, is how do you find them? Where do you find them? But I'm hoping that as I've described what we call a connector, I'm hoping that you're perhaps thinking of people and maybe even yourself as a connector, but you're already starting to think of people that you know and people that are active in the community that are connectors. But at the heart of street connecting, which won't surprise you, is unearthing connectors and giving a space for connectors to do their thing. And this was a quote that one of our connectors came back from some training from Bonhoeffer, that says, "The person who loves their dream of community will destroy it, but the person who loves those around them will create community." And I think that kind of, for us, really summed up kind of what street connecting is about and what being a connector is about. The key step is to nurture a team of connectors. So we're not individuals, we're not in isolation. So having a group, a team of people who are committed to connecting. This was a photo that we took just after lockdown here, so a couple of years ago now, when we had kind of opportunity to it was safe again to go back out street connecting and door knocking, and this was one of our first outings back out again, knocking doors after the lockdown. So having a group, having a team, bringing together connectors, not just working with people in isolation. We talk about having what we think is a bit of a different conversation. If you've done some asset-based training, you might have come across this term, good life conversations, trying to seek out the good life in our community. And we feel that it is a slightly different kind of conversation that perhaps happens on a day-to-day basis. Not the kind of conversation that necessarily the local council would have with us, but this is the kind of conversation that so we really try and nurture what we call these good life conversations. And this slide, hopefully you can see it. There's 4 levels or 4 areas of what we would understand as a good life conversation. At the heart of it, it's actually really, really simple, is that you know me and I know you by name, and 2 neighbours are making a connection, and we both know that we are welcome in our community. And that sounds like that's such a simple step, but I think it's a step that perhaps people don't pay enough attention to. And I think when we go door knocking, which I'll talk about in a bit, when we literally knock on people's doors, that's actually a really crucial step to that, you know, we've had that first encounter, we've introduced ourselves, we've given space for someone to introduce themselves to us. And in some shape or form, we have both made each other welcome in our community. We then seek ways to move this conversation on. So we look to discover what enriches our lives and what gives us life. So that might be, what do people enjoy doing? What do they have an interest in? What do they love giving time to? What do they care about? What are they passionate about? What are skills that they've got? What have they got talents in? So we just try and seek lots of conversation. We have these pictures, these questions up on our wall in our community hub. We just always have these questions in our toolkit of trying to unearth what is it that, you know, brings someone life and gives life. The next level, or however you want to describe it, so we explore which of these passions and interests and skills that people may wish to develop into a new way of participating in community, an offer or a contribution to community life. And that doesn't need to be grand. I mean, doesn't have to be that someone wants to set up a whole new project or give hours and hours to something. It could be that somebody wishes to, they love computer games and they would love to get other people involved in computer games or board games, or making a cup of tea. You know, I mean, within our place of welcome, we always say, you know, most people can make a cup of tea. Well, here in England anyway, most people can make a cup of tea, and that can be their offering in community life. So it doesn't have to be grand, it doesn't have to be huge. And then the last one is connecting that in. So when someone says, I would love to do X, then it's looking for that space, that opportunity. So having an understanding of the ecology of the community, lots of groups and activities that happen, trying to nurture those spaces and try and make those spaces welcoming as well, and then connecting someone in. So if someone says, oh, I quite like a bit of acting, then kind of connecting them in with the local theatre group and that sort of stuff. So that's kind of how we understand a good life conversation. Where do we do that? So the first port of call is we go out and do door knocking. So this kind of works for us. We haven't got an abundance of bumping places. We haven't got a busy high street or a bustling kind of centre of community here. So quite a few years ago, we said, well, how do we have conversations with people that we don't know already? People who don't already show up. So we kind of said, well, let's go to people's doorsteps. So the team of us go out weekly, and we go out and just literally not pick a street and start knocking on people's doors. Can be quite daunting. Kind of over here, the only people that really knock your door is people trying to sell you something or trying to make you vote for something. So it can be quite hard to overcome that initial why are you here, why are you on my doorstep. But we do have a bit of a script, and we have ways in to open up that conversation, but we do find it a fruitful space, particularly after lockdown. It was really fruitful, but we really do find that a fruitful space to have got that first initial conversation with people. A big part of street connecting is about street parties. So we are a 1960s built community that has lots of these green spaces that you should be able to see in this picture that don't really get used for anything. They're not parks. So we were like, well, actually, these are great spaces to bring the community together. You might call it a block party, if that's an understanding that you guys have. And basically what happens is we only do them when there's a host. So in this picture, Ria and Amy in this picture are the hosts. They live in that vicinity. They live close, and in essence, it's their street party, and we get alongside them. So we go out door knocking. We encourage people to come, and they're all slightly different to each other, but they have the same sort of principle. And the crucial part of them is they're quite small. They're intentionally small. On one level, they're intentionally chaotic. They're not too structured, and they're just that space, as you can see in this picture, for people to chat, to connect, and to get to know each other. And one of the things that was really interesting within our evaluation is that these are spaces that people say, I get to know someone that I didn't know before. I meet somebody that I didn't speak to before. These are spaces where people genuinely do encounter neighbours for the first time, and lots of our stories begin at a street party. People say, oh, I walked past and I came over, or I responded to an advert, and these are some of the crucial spaces where we have those first encounters, and obviously an opportunity to go a bit deeper with some of the conversations. So hosting street parties, and we have about 20 a year now that happen across our neighbourhood. And they're just fun as well, which is good. Another big part is, I talked a little bit about bumping places. So in ABCD, there's this talk of bumping places, places where people naturally bump into each other. One of the only ones that we have here, we've got 3 primary schools. So obviously lots of parents drop off their children at primary schools. So the picture here is some of the connectors just being there, offering a drink and a chat. We have places of welcome, which are kind of drop-ins, cafes, lots of spaces where that kind of social interaction happens. And the street connectors kind of inhabit that space, offer that welcome, there for a chat. And actually just being in those spaces can just make a subtle difference to those spaces, where there might be that person who's just spotting somebody who's on the edges and on the fringes, and somebody who's perhaps up for a bit of a chat. So just being in those bumping places is a key part of what we do. This one, if you want to start wondering why it says PAPOW, that was us trying to be funny, because it's a pop-up place of welcome. So it's a PUPOW. We then look to have what might be a bit of a deeper conversation. So we are, conversations are important, and just connections is really important, but we are looking for conversations that lead to involvement and inclusion and action. We are seeking conversations with people that are looking to get them involved and looking to find ways that they will be included, and ways that they would love to take part in some sort of action, some sort of activity. So we do try and go a bit deeper. And I think the other thing that's really important about these conversations is they could happen over 2 or 3 years, from that initial doorstep, first door knock, through to someone getting really involved can take a long time. it's not a quick fix. It's not an immediate thing, but having space where you can have these slightly more deeper conversations is a crucial bit. Supporting people's ideas. So having some time and capacity to listen, first of all, to those little ideas that people have, things that they would love to do. We set up a few years ago, these are called pie events. Initially they were soup events, which I think is something that's come out of America. And basically, as a neighbourhood, we come together, we have a meal, and we listen to people who've got ideas for our community. Now we're fortunate, we've got a little bit of funding, so we've got some community funding, so people apply for £200, and they just say what they would like. But the key bit with these spaces, and when we introduce these spaces, we say actually tonight isn't about the money, and I think that's another crucial part of street connecting, is it's not about the funding. And I think, you know, I generally say to people that we could fund these projects 100 times over. It's not really about the money. It's about listening to the gifts and the skills and the passion of our neighbours, and it's about investing in it and supporting it. So, and what we then get is a space where people offer. So Becky here said, I want to do an art space thing for children. And then somebody piped up and says, well, actually, we've got a load of craft stuff in our cupboard. Why don't you come and have a look, and you can have it if you want it. And then someone said, oh, well, our venue's going spare, you know, if you wanted to use our venue. And you just start getting these offers. And instead of taking money off people and say, well, you don't need money for craft anymore, we say, well, what else would you spend the money on? So you're creating that space for people to offer and support and encourage. And then a last kind of pillar is about fostering celebration. So sharing stories that enrich the community story. And there's a big way in which we do this. Every year we have a unsung hero, not a competition, an unsung hero awards evening, where we celebrate those people who make contributions in our community, big and small. But actually, it's about fostering celebration all year round, about offering spaces to share stories all year round, and you know, stories that really enrich the whole community story. And I think one of the biggest impacts here is that when I first arrived here, there was definitely a community spirit, and there was definitely a sense of togetherness, but there was a little bit of a narrative of, well, why bother? Why give up your time? Why should I get involved? Whereas I think getting people to share their stories of when they have got involved and when they have done stuff in community, and where there is goodness and kindness, when you lift those stories up, the actual the neighbourhood story starts to change. And I think that's what I'm experiencing here, and I think lots of us are experiencing here, is a community that starts to talk differently about itself. Yes, okay, we still have some issues and problems, but we start to talk about the neighbour down the street who helps each other out, or we talk about the food support that people get, rather than just talking about the negatives. So that's kind of a bit of a whistle stop tour. I'm just going to stop sharing. And I think just offering space, I guess, for some initial responses and what people think.
Awesome. I'm gonna hang on a second. I'm just gonna unpin. So does anyone off before, well, maybe we can go to some small groups, but is there anyone off the top, either in the room or online, that has a question for Paul? Yes, Sharon. I've got Sharon.
Hi, Paul.
Can you hear?
I just, one of the thoughts that I, as soon as I read off the mark, somebody like myself can tend to get overwhelmed, even though I do feel I am a connector. I do feel that I get overwhelmed. And what kind of advice is there for sort of
Okay.
tempering it. I'm excited. At the same time, it's like, oh.
Awesome. So, so Sharon's question, Sharon is an amazing, we'll toot her horn just a smidge. She is part of her local community garden and her neighborhood association, and taking some awesome leadership with a new group called Vibrant Arc, which is Art Reconnecting Community, and she's passionate, and she is a community connector. This morning already, she was telling me, oh, I connected this person to do this thing. She's just, and she's excited. But sometimes she feels a bit overwhelmed by that. Do you have any suggestions or any stories around helping citizens who are doing this kind of awesome connecting to take all of it in? It's a lot, you know, and she gets passionate. She's busy. She doesn't say no. And so any advice for Sharon?
I mean, there's loads. I mean, that word no is an important one. I mean, people say it all the time, but learning, I think it's one of Cormac's things where Cormac Russell, where he says your no needs to be as good. Your no needs to be valid, because if your no is not valid, then your yes is meaningless. So I think that's just quite a simple thing. I think what we find here is pace is crucial. I think we've made mistakes going too quick. I think going at the speed of trust is another thing that kind of we talk about a lot, but I think pace of things don't feel like you have to move too quickly. I think having a sense of team, like there's a dynamic, there's a group of people, and also things will go wrong. I mean, one of the things, I try not to share our story as a glossy, everything's perfect and everything's great. We've had some things go badly wrong, and so I think just learning to embrace the challenges and and everything's a learning opportunity. Everything's an opportunity for a reflection space, and I think carving out those times to stop and to reflect and journey with other people. I think that's a crucial part of that. So, and that can be supervision if it's a paid role, but I think spaces and people that you can talk to and reflect on the journey together.
Great, thanks, Paul. I see Don has his hand up.
Paul, first of all, very inspiring, and I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much for that. Just a quick question in terms of your experience. Community connections sometimes can start or be tied to agencies or other bigger organizations that have its own, I guess, baggage, or has its own mandates, or has its own issues. It sounds like your stuff is very through almost osmosis. It's sort of just neighborhood by neighborhood without agendas. Can you talk about some pros and cons, or have you seen that? I mean, again, through ABCD, I mean, again, we all are tied into individuals or people with disabilities, and really about how they can become community connectors, or being all a part of that on the journey. But within that, there's a baggage, or there's potentially baggage, and any experiences or any thoughts on that very broad question?
I think, I mean, a key part of our story here is this is as close to a neighborhood level as I think is possible. This is a small neighborhood, and I think and the reach of what we try and achieve is on on the grand scheme of the country is actually quite small, but I think it's the beauty is in the smallness, and I think not scaling this up and going too big. I think we and therefore it's hard, because I mean I get paid. There are organisations, there are structures, there are what you what might be called institutions, but I think we try and keep it as neighbourhood level as possible. And I think where it gets quite blurry as well. So I live in this community as well. So it's kind of, when am I showing up as a neighbour and as a friend, and when am I showing up as a paid professional? And sometimes it's kind of impossible to take all those different hats off. And but I think within all of that, there is the beauty of kind of how it works here. I think we've had our challenges, and I think one of the key things is when it is at a neighbourhood level, at the heart of it is just a neighbourhood that's looking out for itself. And I think sometimes we just have to strip it back to that. So people's participation levels might drop off in a formal way because of lots of things, family circumstances, mental health, lots of things and challenges and barriers. But you know what we try, and because it is at a neighbourhood level, what we try and make sure is still present is the community connection is still there. You know, somebody's still supported, somebody's still involved, somebody's still able to participate and able to get involved. It's not like they've stopped volunteering and therefore that's it. You know, they've stopped it. There's a neighbourhood level to this and a street level to this, and just nurturing those community connections at that really local level. And I guess one of the hardest parts of all of that is organisational structures start to not work at that neighbourhood level. They haven't got the language, they haven't got the policy, and I think they shouldn't have, because this is about community and about neighbourhood. So that's when it starts to get just a little bit tricky about kind of where do some of the boundaries come in, and if you get what I mean. Sorry, Don, that's helpful.
Great, thanks for the question, Don. Thanks, Paul. Just gonna switch my view here so I can see you all better. Any other hands going up? Other questions? Sorry, sometimes I forget to look at the room. I was going to ask a similar question, or you already spoke to it, about neighborhood, and yeah, neighborhood as like the unit of change, and how important that is. So here's a question, and I think people sometimes get. I mean, I love that you described that there are not a lot of bumping spaces where you are, because sometimes folks live, you know, in very suburban, like there's houses and, you know, in a park, in a trail, maybe, if you're like, yeah, maybe a local convenience store or something like that. And you feel like, wow, where would we connect with people? And what does that look like? Nothing fancy happening here. So there's sort of like that, but there always is, if we're intentional, we can find something, and it's the people and their gifts at the doors. I think it's really exciting. We often have folks though who are like passionate about something that, you know, goes maybe beyond the neighborhood to a broader community action. And, you know, I'm thinking of Sharon and the work that she's gotten involved with around art, and it's art, like, you know, pretty cool art for like the whole city. And the city here in Brantford is 115,000, so it's you know, it's not 5,000. Do you have experience with like sort of like this? I'm trying to, in my head, I'm balancing out the importance of staying local, neighborhood, street level, versus those interest and passion groups that might include people more broadly in the community. Is anything different in the approach, or what do you have any advice for that situation? That clear?
I think one of the weaknesses of the purely neighbourhood approach is you might miss that opportunity that you're talking about. And I think the other thing is people's horizons are just the neighbourhood. So I think, and it works both ways. I think I would say absolutely. I think, but the primary thing is this neighbourhood and the connections within this neighbourhood. I think that's always our starting point. That's our baseline, if you want to use that. But I think actually broadening people's connections beyond the neighbourhood. seeing what's possible beyond the neighbourhood, I think is huge. And I think, you know, some of the ideas that have emerged from here have gone slightly bigger, or they've connected in with some slightly bigger stuff. And I think, you know, that has a massive impact on the individual as well as the idea. And I think, you know, and on the other places that the encounter, I think, I think the flip happens as well. So I think just broadening people's horizons beyond the community, building relationships outside of the neighbourhood. I think where I start to get concerned is when if it's flipped the other way, so it becomes more about the bigger, you know, more about the city, more about the you know, if that's the starting point, and that's kind of the that's where the energy is. That's where I get a bit, I just pull it back a little bit and say, well, hang on a minute, what's happening here in the local, you know, how does this impact the local, how is this drawing people in at a local level? And I think that's but that push-pull is really important. And I think the benefits on both sides, kind of, you know, we're not an island, you know, I mean, the UK is an island, but we're you know, we're you know, Bromford is not an island. And I've had conversations with people and actually push back sometimes, because, you know, sometimes people draw lines on a road and say that's not in our community anymore. And I think there's real strength in that. I think there's strength in having an identity and having a sense of place. You know, I think we really kind of celebrate the sense of place here. And I think, and the story that comes with that place here, that's not always a positive story, a story of injustice and inequality. But actually sometimes the conversation needs to be, does that boundary matter in this conversation? Are we missing something by drawing that boundary today? Are we missing an opportunity, a connection, an ability to do something really exciting just because we've got this, yeah, we've got this boundary that someone's drawn? So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Great, thanks for answering my question. That's lovely. That's really helpful. Do we want to take a minute to go to small groups to do just sort of like what's resonating and come back? Does that make sense, Paul?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, so here's where I do math again. I'm not good at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and there is 3, 4. So what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm gonna do goats. We'll create, let's try 5 breakout rooms. Yeah, take some time just to listen to one another. I think the question for those of you who've been with us for the last couple of days just might be like, what's coming up for you right now? What is resonating with you? And maybe the question also is, listening to the story of Bromfield and what's been happening there with these ideas, what might be possible based on what is going on. So what is possible? And I'm gonna, Katie, I see your message. I'm gonna try and figure that out in a second. So I may shift a couple people around. So you may be zoomed about in cyberspace in a second, but bear with me. We'll give this a shot. I'm going to open up the room. So we'll take 9 minutes to do this. So try and take 3 minutes each to talk and feel and listen in. So what is possible based on what you're hearing? Just, or a few minutes to see what was coming up for you in the small groups. What you don't have to share. I don't need a full breakdown, and you know, it's not like a large small group presentation, but is there something that was kind of really coming up for you, something that was resonating with you with your conversation? And I'll look to bye Dawn, thanks for being here. I'll look to both spaces. I have to be mindful of both our locations. So on screen, like raise a virtual hand or jump up and down in some way. And if there's anything in the room, I'd love to hear what was happening out there too. So anything, what was coming up for you during your small group? What are you feeling excited about? What was feeling possible? Or an aha moment? Anyone brave? Oh, I got Leanne and Lena have raised a hand. Woohoo! Go for it.
So we're both parents, and it's funny because Risha, I'm sure you motivated me this at one of the AGMs a few years ago, but it's neighborhood. And so what I'm planning to do is have my daughter, just draft out some invitations. We're meeting on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, iced tea, cookies, meet your neighbor. And so it's setting the foundation and just getting that initial meeting done and just find out what people like about where they are and who they are. So thank you for doing that.
So fun. Will you shoot me an email and tell me how it goes? Oh, and pictures if possible. I love it. That's awesome. Thank you. Anyone else have an aha? Don't feel pressured by Leanne's action. Anything else is coming up for you? That was amazing. I love that. Yes, we got some here in the room.
So we kind of talked about post-COVID of like, what are the things that like community used to build a lot more naturally? Like you used to know your neighbors more naturally, but like I've been in the same house for 3 years and talked to one neighbor the whole time I was there. So like, how do we need to do more intentional street connection? And how do we need to be more intentional about community connection in a time where we're kind of recovering from the time where we couldn't be within 6 feet of anyone for 2 years?
Yeah. So Nadine is just sharing, having lived in the same place for 3 years and knowing one neighbor and how important it is, and just thinking about how intentional we need to be as neighbors. Yeah, and to reach out, especially, she was just saying, especially after we've come out of this terrible time of isolation, and how important that really is. Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you. What I love that I'm hearing you say about that, and Tara, get to too, and that Leanne, is just that we are all neighbors. And so wherever we are, like this work, it might be your work, but it's also your life, right? And I think that's exciting too. All right, we got another one from the room, so shout it out and then I'll repeat as needed.
You actually did because in our group we talked about the difference between like our lives and work, how like if we're working in the neighborhood that we live in or not, and what's easier or has more challenges. And I guess we just boiled it down to like trusting ourselves and being intentional and making a plan, but how that you can't fully separate yourself from your work when you're talking about community. So that's a good conversation.
Did everybody hear that? Tara's comments about, trusting ourselves, and that pickle that Paul has found himself in the past. I know I've been there too. And a lot of folks here work close by places that they live. And how do you, so just trusting yourself in that space. That's awesome. Anything else coming up for folks online, something you're feeling excited about? Oh, I got one more here from Jocelyn. Shout it out.
Something that was talked about in our group had to do with like the neighborhood cleanup and connecting that way. Like a lot of the generation, like Belonging Brant, we've heard at multiple events how the different generations, especially the younger ones, all want to give back by cleaning up their neighborhood, and they want to see less garbage everywhere. So some different things that were talked about was one, like going on walks. Sharon shared that during walks she brings garbage bags to clean up the litter while she's out and about. So that could be a way of, that could be your bumping space.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Good angle.
One, was like we did a James walk with
It was Brantford Station.
the Brantford Station.
Yeah.
Like they did clean up at the park.
Yeah.
Nadine suggested there was one in Hamilton where they connected with the city first, because it's kind of like a health and safety if you were to bring out just to go like pick up garbage, only because of like the needles. Like that kind of stuff. So maybe connecting with the city or the health unit and finding out what resources to use if we see that while we're cleaning up. And maybe they can provide materials or if there's a specific place that we could clean up together, just to build that initial bond and then kind of go from there. But it's just starting somewhere
Awesome.
with what we're doing.
That's great. I love that. Creating, and there for that, yeah. Community cleanup as a bumping space.
Mm.
Sorry, we couldn't really hear what she was saying. Could you reiterate?
Absolutely. So Jocelyn was just sharing in Brantford, Jocelyn and Jenna have been speaking with a lot of folks out in community. And one of the things I hear, particularly from young people, but from other folks, as well as different generations, is people valuing the activity of doing neighborhood and community cleanups. So in even just doing a walk, we've done Jane's walks, or Sharon was sharing that when she just goes out on a walk, she brings a garbage bag with her to do cleanup, but how that can actually serve as a bumping space for talking with people or inviting someone along to do a cleanup with you. And people will stop and ask you. I know I've done that with my neighbor, and people are like, what are you doing? We're like, oh, well, we're just caring for a neighborhood. Do you want to join us? And and people have, which is really cool. Follow us for a little bit of the block and contribute, right? So I think that is great. And we were just talked about, we need to take precautions around safety if you live in a community where there are needles. And so the importance of sometimes connecting with the city or making sure that you have safe ways of picking up sharps and things like that. But yeah, no, that is great. Kind of a bumping space on the move. Beautiful. Lovely. Excellent. All right. Did I miss a hand? Or did we get them all here? Anybody else online want to share? I think not seeing any. I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to screen share, and he's got a little bit more for us.
So just a couple of thoughts on the stuff that people have been sharing. I love the I think after lockdown, the first lockdown here, it was such an interesting experience for me because I work and live in the community, as I said. But when lots of the tools that you've used in the past, like parties and meals and gatherings, when they're all taken away, it literally was stripped back to just me and my my family on a street, my own street. And I actually sat there the one day and thought, I do all this stuff in the community, but what do I actually do on my own street? And we'd done a street party a few years before, but it just really made me think of actually it does begin on your doorstep and the opportunities that are there. So I love I think it was Leanne saying about just organising that get together and that first encounter, and I think just opening up that space. A lot of this stuff is actually relatively simple. I think sometimes we can overcomplicate it, but just like open up that space. And I think the other thing that a few of those examples made me think of is also not falling into the trap of being the provider. I think where sometimes people don't quite get this is they think, oh, we need to provide street parties, we need to provide litter picking, and then recruit people. I think actually you're half there, I think, because doing stuff is really good, but actually open that space up. I love the idea of street clean as bumping places. And I know the litter picking group we have here, there is sometimes an interesting dynamic between the people that just want to go litter picking and then the people like myself and a couple of others that just want to stop and have a conversation as we go. And it's just holding those tensions of the two, but actually, yeah, seeing those as opportunities to offer, would you like to join in? Would you like to get involved? This isn't just a group of us that are cleaning your community. This is a space for everybody to join in and get involved. I think that's a key part of kind of this approach, I think, and this is where it is different in that sense. So yeah, I'll share a couple of slides. So I know you had Simon from the democracy stuff. So this was one that I did. I did a talk with them before, and just used a slide and just make sure this works. So just kind of, so this is a diagram that they use. I guess just outlining where, in relation to that kind of citizenship and democracy, where I felt that this was the territory that we were working within. So, you know, we kind of are looking at, we have got a local partnership group, a resident-led partnership group. We do have plans for our community. We have a legacy plan. We have local people who have a pot of money that they can invest in. You know, and a lot of this stuff will feed in to some of those decision-making processes, and encouraging people to take action. We talk a lot about associational life. So nurturing those spaces and places that, you know, bumping places are a crucial part of it, but that next step beyond that to some of those informal and formal spaces and associations where people come together. So one of the key ones here is our theatre group, which started off with what are you passionate about? And a local guy called Phil said, I want to do a theatre group. He was very, very focused that it wasn't going to be amateur dramatics, and this was going to be an inclusive space for everybody to have a go. And there's a whole part of it that is obviously about dressing up and putting on performances and having fun, but actually there's a crucial part of it that's about supporting each other and nurturing and being there for each other. And then we have this, and the next slide kind of begins to open this up, this interesting relationship with institutions and the local council here. And I think one of the things that sometimes people throw at this approach is, well, you're just replicating the council, or you're doing their job for them, especially things like street cleaning and stuff like that. But we kind of take that approach of saying, what are the things that we can do for ourselves, and what are the things that as a community we can do for ourselves? What are the things that we need support with, that we need to work with others to do? And then what are the things that we need our council, our government, our institutions to do for us, but to do for us and with us if possible. So it just opens up that space where you do start to get some collaboration, you start to get some neighbourhoods coming together around priorities, and you start to be able to have a conversation, a slightly different conversation with some of those institutions, and particularly the local council here, the local government here. But it's getting that balance right, and I think that's the key bit. And just an example that I wanted to share. So after the first lockdown here, we went door knocking, and we chose a part of our neighbourhood that we knew that we hadn't got as many connections as we had in other parts. And in our neighbourhood, we've got this whole section of it which are 3-storey flats. So, and Sarah, who's in the middle picture, is one of our amazing street connectors. She lives in one of these blocks. So I went and knocked on the doors of those blocks and just found lots of families and children living in flats, and not necessarily having large space, and also having lots of issues with leaks and rat infestations and all sorts of stuff. And there was this real narrative of the council, who are the social landlord, let us down. They don't do anything. They don't respond when we ask them to do stuff. But the conversation we had went along the lines of, well, what is it? The first thing that we tried to do was to have that conversation. Well, not ignoring the fact that you're let down and, you know, the place is a bit run down, but what is it that you would like to do for yourselves? You know, if a couple of neighbours in this block joined in, what is it that you would love to do for yourself? And what emerged was the fact that they'd got this communal garden at the back, at the back of these 2 flats had got this communal garden space, and they said, actually, we'd love to clean it up. The council have just left it. They don't even bother mowing it, and we'd love to do it up. So as we went from door to door, this similar sort of conversation just emerged. You know, we said, well, Tiffany down on the ground floor says that she'd love to do the garden, and then someone else, yeah, well, we'd do that, we'd get involved in that. So, and I think what emerged was this idea that actually as a block, we could not do the council's job, but we could actually take ownership of this space ourselves. You know, this is our communal garden, and let's just crack on with it. So we got alongside them a little bit. We had some tools and a community gardener, and then just came along for the day and just got involved in cleaning it and clearing it out, which is where a lot of these pictures came from. And then the block themselves have just kind of taken it on. But what also is interesting in that process was the 3 levels of this conversation were ongoing. So the guys decided that they could do the garden for themselves and fix the garden, but actually there were things within the block that they needed the council to do for them. There was some electronic issues. There was some wiring that was just been left. So the ongoing conversation was, well, how can we help you have that conversation, and how can then you have that conversation with the council themselves, because you need them to do that for you. And you know, and just constantly going back to these 3 questions of what is it that they can do for themselves, what is it that they need some support with, and then what is it that they need other people to do for them. And it's had its ups and downs, and it's had its crises where everyone's fallen out with each other. So I think it's crucial to paint the picture that it isn't all happy days. As soon as you have these conversations, they've had big fallings out and they've had issues and problems, but the role of the connector, which is Sarah, and then there's another lady called Tiffany. So Sarah is wonderful, and she has this approach and it works. She just bakes, and she will bake for her neighbours. So if there's ever a conflict, she just bakes and she takes it round and has that conversation. So it's really crucial to have that role of that connector in that space as well, who's just ongoing. And there's an interesting development that's just happened recently. Is now we don't know if this is directly linked, but I think there's a possibility it is. But 300 properties in our neighbourhood are being retrofitted, so they're being made to become shining examples of environmentally friendly properties, and this block is one that was chosen. And it's really, really interesting because this conversation carries on. So now the conversation is they're going to get some quite serious regeneration done to their block, solar panels, but the key bit now is, well, how is that done with those residents and not done to them? So actually the network that they built between them, they are now in a position to be able to have that collective conversation with the council to say, well, hang on a minute, yeah, we were excited about what you're doing, but actually we want you to work with us rather than just get this stuff done to them. So yeah, that was I'll stop sharing and see what people make of all of that.
Anyone have questions or something coming up? I'm going to ask a question to all of you for those of you who are connected. This is not all of us in the room or online, but some of us are connected to developmental services, and I'm wondering if folks are seeing themselves in this sort of alternative way of being part of community. So you might be, I know we have parents here, which is amazing, caregivers, but we also have staff. Is there, and also in the room, but we also have lovely neighbors here with us too. Yeah, are you making connections? Because it sounds like a neighborhood organizing structure. How do I fit into that? What's my role in all of this? Does anyone have a comment or question out of that? Question to my question. Because it's not about service, right? I think that's the tricky thing. That's the paradigm shift here, is not about providing a service. Good, go for it.
This maybe not even addressing what you just said.
Yeah.
It's about the connection community. So at yesterday's meeting, Paul Shepherd was here. He does a drum circle in Victoria Park at 1 o'clock. And I'd heard about it and didn't make time to go out, but yesterday I did. And I had to say I approached it with trepidation, because these are people I didn't know, and I'm meeting them in a park, and we're going to sit around and just invite people to come and sit with and drum, and never done it before. It's having a great time there, and so I started to feel energized by it. And then there's a guy going through the park, and he was looking over in our direction, and I was doing this, and he's like,
Community connector. Go ahead.
like pointing at himself, and so then I was like, and so he came over, oh, he was having and he was just sad that he had to go.
Yeah.
And then what really touched my heart so deeply was this man came, and I don't know whether it was his son, but his son doesn't speak except through, like he said, like this is how he speaks. He comes to these drumming sessions,
Nice.
and he speaks through the drums
Wow.
about how excited he is. And just like watching the way that his face lit up, and then the person, whether it's his caregiver, father, whatever, was telling the story about how this young man wears only this particular t-shirt on this day.
Wow.
And he picks that t-shirt every Tuesday.
Huh.
And they thought that he didn't know the days of the week.
Huh.
And then they realized, because he always picked that shirt to wear on that day, that he knew it was
It was
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
And
Wow.
I sat there and I was just like, I was almost in tears when he told that story, because I thought, what a way for this young man to connect with us,
Oh,
that he knows how special that day is for
that's
him.
incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you. I did people get that Sharon's story of the drum circle? Oh my goodness, that she in trepidation joined yesterday, and the fellow with disability who, and what he taught, has been teaching people through his participation. About, yeah, beautiful story. Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Awesome. Okay. Well, maybe we will, I'm gonna put us back into small groups again, because I know we do better in small groups. So I'm gonna send us back out for 9 minutes again in brand. Well, I'm gonna recreate groups. I'm recounting again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Oh, and someone's gone. 13. Okay. I'm gonna put us into 4 groups, and we will we'll see how that goes, and take time again. I think I guess I'm one of the key things that has come up, and we've heard from community connectors here today in community. I might ask you when you're in your small group to think about, do you know community connectors? Are you a community connector? And maybe talk about how you think you might find community connectors, because they are pivotal in moving this forward. So I'm thinking that might be a really great conversation to talk about. So I'm going to encourage you to talk about, are you a community connector? How does that feel? Or do you know one? And how did you get to know them? And how might you find one? And how do you connect to them? So that's going to be your challenge. And I open up the rooms. We'll take about 9-10 minutes, and I'll send you out. We'll be back here just around 25 after 11. And so here we go.
I can answer from my neighborhood.
Go for it, Sarah.
Where I live, which isn't where I work. Halloween. So, but it could be any high traffic event. I just find that Halloween is an easy, like in my neighborhood, we all stand down off our porches because they're all rickety, and kids like going up and down with those big things on, like it's just a nightmare. So we all are out, and that's where I find out about everything. Like what's been happening from the last year. I find out who's pregnant. I find out, you know, who's moving. I find out like the new kids that are going to school, like all of that important things. That's where I find it. Or rummage sales, like volunteering for, we have like a neighborhood garage sale, or like volunteering for local rummage sales. Oh, be there for donation, like obviously deals, but also be there when people are dropping off their things. People will tell you when they're getting rid of their rummage, all sorts of things that are happening in their community. Those are just two things I do.
I love that. I love your point to Halloween and how you can connect in community. And that is, that's how I find community connectors. Something to pay attention to is if you've got, this happens in my neighborhood anyways, sometimes there's like, you know, you've got the single families coming and the little kids are running up to the door. Sometimes there's a really big group of people, and it's like a bunch of dads and or moms have gathered up a bunch of the neighbors, and they're kind of doing the neighborhood as a pack. It's really interesting to find out who's in the middle of that pack. And last October, I found out his name and he's my neighbor up the street. And when I was like, got to be in my bonnet that I wanted to have a neighborhood park party on my street, he was the first person. I was my friend Tracy, who is a daycare provider and knows everybody. And I also went up the street and I asked the other connector that I saw at Halloween. He's like, he's like, I'm not really sure how I know you. I'm like, oh, that's okay. I'm just creepy because I know who you are. And his daughter comes to my little free library, and I just connected all the dots. This guy is a community connector, and he proved himself during our park party. So pay attention. I love Halloween. Good point. Welcome back, Paul.
Sorry, that was the worst possible. Yeah, I mean, awesome questions. I think it kind of $1 million questions, really. I think there's some of the crucial ones. I think it's hard for me to answer some of them only because I live and work in the same community and I've been doing it for so long. It's so blurry. It's so complicated. But I think the whole thing about being invited in is a really interesting thought. I think being present, I think, is crucial. Paying attention, I think, is crucial. I think I do this as a job, and a more than full-time job. But I think actually having that paid time and capacity, I think, is huge. I think being a resident here helps with that. I think being present, and it's my community as well. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think having being welcome into a community, being inquisitive, I think paying attention, I think, is, you know, looking for those little glimpses of people and opportunity. And I think, you know, I mean, someone talked about Halloween. We talk about traditions in our community now. So, you know, we will do a big summer event. We will do a Christmas. Halloween isn't my favorite time of year, but there's lots of people that love dressing up. And I think capitalizing on those kind of times and opportunities where perhaps naturally a neighborhood might come together. Christmas is a big one here. And just looking for those little opportunities. And I think the other bit about, like, how do you find connectors? I mean, turning up at meetings, I would generally say that connectors are probably not the people that would attend a community meeting, and don't necessarily put out there a meeting to bring connectors. But if you do go to the community meetings and stuff, I generally find the connectors are the ones that are making the coffee at the back, or the people that are on the edges of those gatherings, and actually paying attention to those guys, and the ones that want to welcome you and into that space, and just being kind of present to be able to respond to them, and you know, and start to connect people together off the back of that. So yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody else have a question? I mean, I think you also asked, how do you find the energy to do, like if you work outside, but you're involved in your community when you're at home. You know, I think for me, I think about, you know, what fills you up. I think as long as if you're in your own home community, I work in a different community than I live in, and I'm quite involved in my neighborhood at home and in a variety of ways, but they probably all tap into my gift. And if, you know, Carrie's here, probably tap into my core gift even, and which kind of fills you up, right? And those are the things you just can't stop doing. So figuring out what your gifts are, that never feels like, to me, it gives me more energy, even though like some people say, oh, you never stop. How, I don't even know how you did that. How did you go home and do a popsicle pop-up? Totally works. Lemonade, popsicle, either way, out front of your house. You go, Leanne. It's gonna be great. It just made me happy. It didn't feel like work. So I think that's part of the key, is you're doing something you love, right? And it speaks to who you are and makes you feel good. I think that's really important. Yeah. Were there other things that came up in the groups online around how you find community connectors and what difference you think they might make? Or anybody in the room here? Do they seem like an elusive person where you might find them?
What kind of things do you do in your neighborhood that connect you to your neighborhood, Risha?
Oh, thanks for asking, Brigida. That's really Brigida. It's not really me. Even though it says it's Risha. What do? I am part of our community group that runs a twice monthly community meal with our neighbors, which is really exciting and fun. And we're back after, we've been doing that for 10 years.
How does that work? Like, do you do it at someone's house or in a public space?
We have a local church down the street that offers up their space for free in the kitchen, and it is a mad, crazy blend of people in the kitchen and sort of guiding the dining room, and folks from all walks who come for a meal. And yeah, and we call it dinner night out. It's not a food. It is food security for some folks. For some folks, it's just community connection. And we meet around. It's not a soup kitchen. It's a meal. It's lovely. Part of sort of organizing park party on our street. We just started planning our second annual, which is great. We just done one, and I'm a little free librarian, so don't even get me started about that. There's another one in this room, and we could just tell you, Alicia and I could tell you all the stories about what happens when you offer up a little crazy little neutral box at the edge of your property, and what amazing connections will happen there. A bit of chalk. I know Alicia's she's a big believer in the chalk as well. It doesn't take a lot of money to engage your neighbors in some kind of lovely little fun and ways to connect. I use my box as a way of connecting with people. I just invite people to it, and we just put out like yard games, and once a year I do popsicle pop-up, and people come, and like 30 folks show up on a hot night for a popsicle, and I don't do anything after that. I just let them take it away. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Nice. The meal, is it like a potluck and everybody contributes, or
No, that one we tap into, we actually have funding, regular funding we have for 10 years from our local food bank. Instead of people going there, they give us a donation monthly. We also work with a food redistribution initiative that happens in Halton, where I live, called Food for Life, and they give us free food that otherwise might be going to waste. And we have a brilliant head chef who creates something magical out of all of those, the food waste, and a group of folks come in and cook, and people can put in a donation or not, and people do put in donations, and some people don't. Yeah.
And the chef
people,
volunteers his time, or he gets paid?
Nobody gets paid. Nobody gets paid. They're just all citizens who want to be together. Yeah.
Nice.
Other questions, not for me, but thanks for asking, Brigitte. Other questions for Paul, or other thoughts on community connectors before? I feel like Leanne and Aline are like thinking in their square. I did putting you on the spot, but I just like, I'm love to know what's going on in your mind right now. Was there anything that was coming up for you and all of this? You can say no.
I think we were just busted by you, but yeah, we're like brainstorming going in about 14 different directions, but we're both parents, right? So we're taking a look at our small community and what we can do on a small scale, and then all of a sudden we're doing stuff on
now we're housing projecting, and I'm in first-hand connection with an architect, and we're buying these 2 houses, and we're flipping, and we're okay. This is like, you guys got us going on steroids.
Oh my God. Oh. Okay, well, listen.
I love it. And remind me where you folks are.
Kenora.
That's what I thought.
Manitoba border, yeah.
Yeah, we're 2 hours this side of Winnipeg. We're just Ontarians. We just almost didn't make it.
That's beautiful. I love it. Go change the north. Go for it.
Yeah, we are.
Good.
Thanks.
Good. Excellent.
If I can bring up something.
Yep, go for it. Yeah.
If no one else is jumping in.
Yep, go for it.
I've been here at my parents' place in Brantford, and since the whole lockdowns, everything, whatever, and it's been very difficult to meet people. And I'm normally a connector and a social event planner and convener and all of that. But even here for Canada Day, because there was nothing going on the last 2 summers, there was an event here, but I only saw like kind of kids things being set up. And I saw my neighbor walking the kids across, and I said, "Oh, what's going on?" They said, "Oh, there's a Canada Day event," and they just mentioned the kids thing. So I still didn't know. And then later in the day, I heard like Elvis singing, and I decided to walk over, and there was a big concert, but it's such a big Lions Park complex, as they call it. I had no idea. And no one had told us. And like, if we'd stepped out for the day or the afternoon, we wouldn't have even known. And so, but then on the Saturday of that same weekend, the July 2nd, we got these passes for a concert that was happening there. And they were apologizing because it was going to be loud. And it wasn't too loud, actually, but we found out about that because they gave us free tickets. But the actual Canada Day event, there was nothing posted anywhere. We don't know people here, so there was no way to know. And so I don't know who to speak to if there's going to be something in the neighborhood, like, can you at least put little, even like cut up like one piece of 8x10 paper into 4 and make photocopies and put them in the mailboxes in the neighborhood around so people know.
Brigitte, I think you raised like I'm going to go back to the conversation we had with Paul about sort of local versus citywide. And so Canada Day in Brantford is run by the city, and they engage folks. So they're going to share that on social media. And if people aren't looking for it, then you miss it. And if it's not in your algorithm, you're going to miss it. I think that's what's different is this notion of local, and how you would share like a local event going on. Like, so we have an event tonight called Near and Dear, and we have showed it on social media, but the Belonging Brant team have actually been out in Eagle Place in that particular neighborhood, sharing flyers with individual people, doing that local, because it's neighbor, you know, it's anyone can come, but to engage that particular neighborhood, we're trying to do those one-on-one kind of conversations. So I think it is that is in the, not everyone's going to check on social media. And again, you just might miss it if you don't know, but the local, I think we can be really intentional. I know, Paul, if you want to add to that, like just around how we connect with folks and how do you do that? If when you have a park party coming up, how do you spread the word?
Yeah, I think, and there's lots that's coming to mind for that. I think I'll share an experience that happened a couple of weeks ago. So Claire, one of our huge connectors, and is now a trainee. So she's kind of steps into a paid position. But she'd never done a street party on her street. So she said, I really want to close the street. I want to do a street party on my street. So she did it on a weekend, and a few people came. But one of the key things that she said afterwards was the amount of people that were coming up to her saying, I've never been to one of the big events before. And so even after years and years and years and years of community building, there were still people who weren't aware. They might have had a newsletter through the door, they might have had a flyer through the door, they might have had asked to join Facebook groups and stuff like that. So I think it kind of reminded us of the importance of those small street level events, and then the personal invite of a door knock or an individual flyer through the door. And what began to emerge from that was they started saying, oh, why don't we do, so we have a bonfire night here, which I think it's a UK thing. So we have an event around Halloween, and they said, well, why don't we do a bonfire night on our street? And then that's where those conversations started to emerge at a really street level. I think the other thing which I said about the street parties was we have a big festival, and we try and publicise it, newsletters and posters around the community, and people love it. You know, it's a really big event. But one of the bits of evaluation we did, I did mention this earlier, was we ask a question: did you get to know somebody today that you never knew before? And did you speak to somebody, and did you get to know someone by name? And at the big events, people generally said no. They enjoyed it, they loved the event, they thought it was brilliant, they loved the circus, and they loved this and they loved that. But did you actually get to know somebody new today? No. At the street party, 95% of people say, yes, I've got to know someone new today, I've got to. So I think the power of the small, and actually the neighbour to neighbour invite is huge, and the two go hand in hand. So that, you know, it's not saying one's better than the other and you shouldn't do one and you should. It's just that, you know, it's so important, that kind of local street level stuff. And then the other quick thing is, I mean, just it takes time, it takes energy, but you know, we will go to the school gate and hand out leaflets. We will have a newsletter that goes to everyone's door. Try and push Facebook groups and social media and stuff like that. Yeah, just trying every way that you can think of, trying to inform people as much. And it's a job that never ends. I think that's the other thing as well, that, you know, a group of connectors will always be asking who's not here. That's a sign for me of a connector. They are saying they're not happy with 100 people coming. They're not happy with, they kind of say, well, who's not showing up? Who's on the edges of this, and who's missing? And then say, well, how do we then, you know, hunt those edges and look for, you know, look for new people.
Thank you. Thanks for that statement, your question, Brigitte. I think it's important. I just really love this, trying to find the balance between that local and, yeah, I think in some of the conversations I've had with folks like Paul, it's like small is the new big. You know, that's somebody else's statement, but I just think kind of a really important thing to think about. You know, scale isn't everything, you know, but small and slow it can win the race, right? In terms of connection and relationships. That's awesome. Tara, you had your hand up. Well, maybe we'll do one more. Do you remember what your question was?
I don't think it matters.
No, we have one more and then we'll wrap.
I was just wondering, I was just wondering if there was like a really big learning from you, because we're kind of doing similar work, not the same. And I wondered if there was like a challenge or maybe a mistake or something that really stood out to you that you learned from that maybe you could help us avoid. But
Awesome. Good question, Tara. Okay, Paul, all your dirty secrets. What's the biggest mistake you've made?
It's a collective mistake. It's one that a few of us here made. It always struck me. So I was up at the local church, and this isn't me trying to say someone else's mistake, but we were clearing out an office, and there was this big bag of t-shirts, and I was like, "What's this bag of t-shirts?" And there was a community choir t-shirt, and there was a time banking t-shirt, and there was I think there was at least 3 or 4 initiatives that had happened. And I was involved in them. So this was partly, I was involved in all this, and they'd all not worked. I mean, they'd all had their little things that they might have done. And I think that the kind of the thing that struck me from this bag of t-shirt disasters, if you want to call it that, but was all of those ideas hadn't come from the community. They'd not come from someone's gifts or skill. So we had somebody came in, the choir one was a brilliant example, where somebody had come in, an amazing musician, and done some workshops, got lots of people involved. And then on the telly here, there was something called the choir. It was like a guy that went around, and the beauty of choirs. So us professionals were like, "Oh, let's do a choir. That'll be good, wouldn't it? Like, it's working across the country," and we've done a couple of workshops. It just didn't work. A few people joined, but it was totally reliant on the funding. As soon as the funding stopped for the choir master, the project ended. And you know, it was lovely for a little group of people for a 12-month period, but it just didn't. Whereas and you know, the time banking one was just another way of getting people involved. A national initiative just didn't quite work. The flip side of the theatre group is, at an event, we asked the question, if 1 or 2 people in your neighbourhood joined in, what would you love to do? And Phil said, "I want to do a theatre group." He's a show off, and if he was here, he'd tell you he was a show off. It's an excuse for him to get on the stage, but he said, "I want to do a theatre group. I know the power of theatre." So, and then we just went with it. And I think that was the, you know, kind of comparing and contrasting the choir, which on paper sounds like a brilliant thing to do. And choirs are amazing. Don't hear me say that choirs aren't amazing. But if someone in your community says, "I'd love to do a choir," and a couple of other people want to join in, then do a choir. Don't just pick projects because they're a buzz thing or because there's funding. And actually the other part of the theatre group one is, I think over the years it's not needed huge amounts of funding, because it just runs itself. And we kind of find bits of resources to go. It doesn't need £30,000 or dollars a year to keep it going, because it's a funded project. It just keeps going because it's based on people's passions and skills.
Thanks, Paul. Great advice to wrap up with. Thanks for sharing. I think some of us who've worked in social services our whole life have helped pile onto that pile of t-shirts. So I can totally relate to that.
We should all bring our t-shirts.
Yeah, we can bring our field initiatives. I love it. I love it. Awesome. I guess what I'm going to do right now is just ask everybody, if you can, just take a minute to put in the chat, folks in the room. I'm going to get you shut them out, and I'm going to do my best to add them to the chat. Just the one thing you're leaving with today, just as a little bit of a way of sort of encapsulating our time together. So is there something that you're leaving with? It could be just a word about how you're feeling too, or a gift that you're leaving with from today. Yes, Sharon. Go for it.
Bring back the block part.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Good stuff. Maybe what we'll do is we'll just open our mics on the count of 3 and I'll turn to the room and we'll just shout out a goodbye. It's been a pleasure. It's been lovely to watch your faces and see the animated looks, and a huge thanks to Paul for spending this time. It's lovely to get, you know, advice from afar, and to remember that actually we're not really that much different. We drink more coffee, you drink more tea. I'm really thinking that's the only difference right now. That's awesome. Very good. All right, on a count of 3, we'll say goodbye to each other. 1, 2, 3.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.